Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about a interesting story written by Frantz Kafka, The Trial. He wrote many other stories like Metamorphosis, The Castle, which is a very interesting read. But The Trial is very interesting because yesterday I wanted to connect that to yesterday's story on death penalty. Since in the trial, the Joseph K. is kind of put on trial, and I'm not going to say what happens at the end, but it is an interesting idea when the government becomes stateless, or government becomes this totalitarian control of a human life. And the trial is actually exploration when Joseph K. main character is actually being prosecuted for something that he has no idea what he has done. If he's done anything wrong, they won't tell him, and the whole story goes around the idea of how his case should be heard and when he should show up. In fact, he's not placed under arrest, but somehow he is under arrest. It's kind of a performative contradiction. So he doesn't have, it's like a house arrest with ankle monitor. He can leave, but there has to be an ankle monitor, and he has no idea why he's being monitored. And this is kind of it portrays some of the stories from like a Dreyfus Affair, which was an affair in 19th century, an English soldier who was actually a victim and was actually blamed for innocently accused, and that affair is just a very sad story in life. But speaking of that penalty and the trial, this is where Joseph K. and the trial, and Franz Kafka reminds us how dangerous it is for government to have a death penalty, for the law, for the state or federal legislature to enact laws that support death penalty. Death penalty in this case, like with Joseph K., who the story is very interesting. It's not a long story, you can read it, but what the story does, it examines the idea there's many layers of law and access to the law. As we know today, if you have the money, you can have a great defense, you have access to the law, but if you don't, you might get a public defender, and still with a public defender, you probably end up plea bargaining and end up going to jail or probation or whatever might be the situation. But if you have the money, you can fight it, you can appeal to courts, you can appeal all that. So Franz Kafka in the trial, it examines these different layers of law, that how law can perpetuate or negate personal rights. Those people that are in authority that kind of disintegrate the rule of the law. And so if we have dangerous statutes, like statutes that are not dangerous, where the government and the prosecutors and all that can just take the law and twist it and have innocent people go to jail or even being sent to execution, it's just a dangerous notion. But in the story, Franz Kafka really examines this fascinating suffering of accessibility to the law. And there's actually a short story that is actually within the story, within the trial. It's called Before the Law. So it examines that idea. What does it mean to appear before the law and to be judged? And to be judged whether you're guilty or not, and that kind of judgment that perpetuates maybe human rights violations, perpetuates great suffering, and when people are caught in a system like a little screw in the in this big engine, and that little screw is just meaningless. And this is how the story in the trial, Joseph K., who literally stands accused, yet he has no idea what the accusations are, and you cannot find out. And the whole story goes like that. But it presents kind of a surrealistic, but also at the same time nihilistic idea of the society when innocent people are caught in the system. And being in that system is very dangerous. It's very dangerous because people that are in power and in control do not apply to the rule of the law. They do not look at the rule of the law as a binding force. Now we know that law has to have authority and it has to have force. The issue here is that when is the law itself rotten, or something like Hamlet when Horatio says there's something rotten in the state of Denmark, and then there's something rotten in the state of law, and the rules themselves do not enforce themselves. It's the people behind it, and human nature, as we know, human nature tends to use and abuse those laws. Now, the problem with in that Joseph K., and I think Joseph K. explores another issue of identity. If you have certain, it's like if you have certain identity, if you're Jewish or Muslim or Christian in a Muslim country or Muslim in a Christian country, that your rights might not be, or your culture, your rights, your identity might cause you a problem and even eventually have you convicted as being innocent, even though being innocent. So I think Kafka explores these idea of continuous trials and tribulations of the system that occurs and that happens around the world, and where the rule of the law is far removed from certain maybe morality, or maybe the law itself is not just, and people suffer because of it. So in Joseph K.'s story, there's this many layers that an individual has to go through, and that could be compared to let's just say a person is convicted of first-degree robbery, and then they're convicted and they want to appeal that decision, so they have to go to Court of Appeals, and they can go to, if the Court of Appeals affirms the judge's decision, then you have to go to the Supreme Court in that state, and then from the Supreme Court you might want to take it to the federal court, to the circuit that's covering your jurisdiction. And then from that jurisdiction, you might want to go all the way to the Supreme Court. But you see all these layers that take process. While all these appeals are exhausted, you are in jail. So whether you're guilty or not, that is the process. And so the Kafka goes this: how just is this system, and how can we go through this system that is at times exhausting, meaningless, and yet it poses itself on us. But we also have to look at the Kafka story. Kafka, 1930s, the whole Europe was, there was a whole shadow of totalitarianism taking over the Europe. So we have to look at his idea and the environment into which this story was created. Yet the trial is very fascinating. It's a fast read. You can finish it in a couple of days or in a day, but there are so many questions that come from that. And these novels are a little more nihilistic, something that creates this psychological decay because the person is continuously fighting the system. and yet the system wins. And this is why I say that giving a weapon such as death penalty is a very dangerous notion to the government. But the problem is there are people that commit such crimes that you just don't know what fits the punishment for that crime. So there is two sides of the story. Yet I think that penalty is something that should be carefully and considered and not just implemented because people tend to take rules and things and just spin it to the point where innocent people might get hurt. Well, that is on Kafka and kind of connecting it to death penalty. Kafka, very interesting writer. If you want to read the short story Before the Law, it's called Before the Law, and that short story is just an incredible how it shows these different layers of law and different authoritarian levels where you have to pass through each level, but sometimes you can't even get through the first level, and then climbing up that ladder of the law is just kind of challenging, but really challenging and exhausting. But and that's what I want to say. I will talk a little more about Kafka because Kafka shows many themes and many features of how the society in a totalitarian regime can really abuse and disregard the rights of the human rights. All right, that's all for now, and we'll talk later.